You think winning an argument means talking faster, louder, and throwing more facts at the other person. Most people believe that. They assume the person who speaks the most usually wins. But the truth is something almost nobody realizes. The person who actually controls most arguments is usually the one who speaks the least. And once you understand why, you'll start noticing something strange in conversations everywhere. The calmest person in the room often controls the entire room. A few years ago, I witnessed something that completely changed how I understand arguments. 7 people were sitting around a table. At first it was just a normal conversation about some controversial topic. Nothing unusual. But after a few minutes the tone shifted. Voices started getting louder. People interrupted each other. Everyone wanted to prove their point. Everyone wanted to be right, except one person. He was sitting slightly away from the group, quiet the entire time. While everyone else was constantly talking, he barely spoke. Maybe a short sentence here, a few words there. But something strange started happening. Every time he finally said something, the entire room went quiet. People listened, and by the end of that conversation, most of the group had shifted toward his perspective. Not because he argued harder, not because he overwhelmed people with facts, but because he understood something about human psychology that most people never learn. If you don't understand this, you'll keep having the same frustrating experience many people have during arguments. You'll feel like people don't really listen to you. You'll feel like your points make sense, but somehow they still don't land. And the worst part is you won't know why. Because the problem usually isn't your logic. It's the way human minds react during conflict. The first thing you need to understand is that silence makes people uncomfortable, extremely uncomfortable. In most disagreements, when someone says something provocative or aggressive, our instinct is to respond immediately. We defend ourselves, we interrupt, we jump in with our own explanation. But when you resist that instinct, something very interesting happens. Imagine someone says something confrontational to you. Instead of responding instantly, you pause, you look at them, and you say nothing for a few seconds, 3 seconds, maybe 4. That silence feels much longer to them than it does to you. And during those few seconds, their brain starts racing. Did I say something wrong? Did that sound stupid? Why aren't they responding? Humans hate empty silence in conversations. So the other person often rushes to fill that silence themselves. They start talking again. They add more explanation. Sometimes they soften what they originally said. Sometimes they even start contradicting themselves without realizing it. Slowly their argument begins weakening, and suddenly you're no longer chasing the conversation. You're controlling it without even raising your voice. This is sometimes called the power pause. Negotiators use it, therapists use it, even professional interrogators use it. Silence often reveals more than words ever could, but silence alone isn't the real secret. The second principle is even more powerful. Stop trying to prove people wrong. Instead, start asking questions. At first this sounds backwards. When someone disagrees with us, our instinct is to correct them immediately. We want to show them why they're mistaken. We want to explain why our logic makes more sense. But the moment you tell someone they're wrong, something predictable happens in their mind. Their defenses rise instantly. Their ego becomes involved. And now they're not listening anymore. Now they're preparing their counterattack. But questions create a completely different reaction. Instead of saying, "That doesn't make sense," imagine saying something like, "That's interesting. What makes you see it that way?" Suddenly the energy changes. You're not attacking them. You're inviting them to explain themselves. And when people explain their own reasoning, they begin analyzing it more carefully. Sometimes they discover the weaknesses in their own argument. And when someone reaches a realization on their own, it has far more impact than if you forced that realization on them. This method has existed for thousands of years. Philosophers used it constantly. Teachers still use it today. Great communicators rely on it, because guiding someone to think is far more powerful than telling them what to think. But there's another element most people overlook during disagreements. Energy. Arguments are emotional exchanges, just as much as they are logical ones, and emotions spread quickly between people. When someone approaches you with anger or aggression, it's extremely easy to match that intensity. They raise their voice, you raise yours. They become more confrontational. You respond with equal force. Now the conversation has turned into a battle. And once a conversation becomes a battle, nobody is really listening anymore. But something very different happens when you refuse to escalate. Imagine someone speaking to you with intense emotion. Instead of matching their energy, you respond calmly. Your voice remains steady. your posture relaxed, your tone controlled. Psychologically, something interesting happens in that moment. Your calmness becomes a mirror, reflecting their behavior back at them, and many people suddenly realize how intense they sound. They begin adjusting their tone. They slow down. Their aggression fades because your calm presence makes their reaction feel exaggerated. This is emotional intelligence in action. The most respected people in any environment are rarely the loudest ones. They are the most composed ones. Think about the people you respect the most in your life. Are they the ones constantly arguing and trying to dominate conversations? Or are they the ones who stay calm when everything around them becomes chaotic? Composure communicates authority without needing to announce it. But there is one final skill that might be the most powerful of all: knowing when not to argue at all. Many people struggle with this because walking away can feel like losing. But the truth is, not every argument is worth your time or energy. Some people aren't arguing to discover truth. They're arguing to protect their ego. Others argue simply because they enjoy the conflict. And when someone is in that mindset, no amount of logic will change their perspective. If someone isn't interested in understanding, the conversation becomes a trap. The more energy you invest, the more exhausted you become. But when you calmly say something like, "I think we just see this differently," and you leave the discussion there, you've done something powerful. You've protected your time, your attention, your mental energy, and surprisingly, that quiet confidence often earns more respect than winning the argument would have. People remember how you behave under pressure. They remember whether you stayed composed or lost control. Over time, that reputation shapes how seriously others take your words. But none of these ideas matter if they remain theory. Understanding communication is easy. Practicing it is the real challenge. The next time someone disagrees with you, notice your first instinct. You'll probably feel the urge to react immediately, to defend your position, to prove your point. Instead, pause for a moment. Let the silence exist. Ask a question. Stay calm. Observe how the conversation changes. You might be surprised how quickly the dynamic shifts, because communication isn't really about dominating discussions. It's about understanding how people think, how they react, and how emotions influence logic. Once you see those patterns clearly, arguments stop feeling like battles you must win. They become conversations you can guide. And the strange thing is, the more comfortable you become with silence, curiosity, and composure, the less you feel the need to argue at all. People begin listening more carefully, not because you forced them to, but because your presence feels different, more controlled, more thoughtful. In a world where most people react instantly and emotionally, that kind of presence stands out immediately. So the real question isn't whether you can win arguments. The real question is whether you're willing to change how you approach them, because the way you communicate affects far more than debates. It shapes your relationships, your opportunities, and the respect you receive in every room you enter. If you keep reacting the same way most people do, nothing will change. The same frustrations will repeat, the same misunderstandings will appear. But if you start applying even one of these principles in your next conversation, you'll begin noticing something shift. Conversations become calmer, people listen more carefully, and eventually you realize something important. The strongest communicator in the room is rarely the loudest one. It's the one who understands when to speak, when to stay calm, and when silence says more than words ever could.